Okay, we're in volume 9 of the Bible story by Arthur S Maxwell, and we are at part 2. Okay, now we have a painting right here by William Helsop. I know what it's about, but it's got he uses a lot more dark in Hessop's pictures than anything, and it says 57 on it. So this is the illustration right here. You got a guy, got 3 priests, and a guy in orange red, kind of getting away from him and trying to hide that what he did. Okay, and the caption reads, "When Satan filled the heart of Judas, one of Jesus' trusted disciples, he went to the priest and bargained with them to betray his master onto his into their hands for 30 pieces of silver." So that little green bag he's got a hold of it had 30 pieces of silver, which is probably big chunks of silver. Okay, we're part 2, story 1, feet Jesus washed. Okay, it is the most interesting fact that about the same time that the Greeks arrived at the temple, longing to see Jesus, one of his closest disciples came there to betray him. This disciple asked to see the chief priest, and they, curious to find out what he might have to say about his master, invited him to talk with them. He said that his name was Judas Iscariot. That's Iscariot. Most people say Issachar, but Iscariot is what I always heard. And that he was one of the 12 special friends with Jesus. He had been disappointed in the Galilean teacher, however, chiefly because all his talk about a wonderful kingdom hadn't come true. And now, well, what would they be what would they be willing to pay to find out that they're where he was staying at night? The priest must have been amazed that one who had followed Jesus so long should have turned against him like this. But why should they worry? This was a break for them. They would like to arrest Jesus at night when nobody was about. Could Judas lead them to his secret hiding place? Okay, he could, but how much would they pay for this information? Give me a second. How about 30 pieces of silver? One of them asked. Judas agreed, and the money was counted out to him. He put it in his purse and walked away, having sold his Lord and Master for a piece for the price of a slave. Um, they got 30 pieces for Joseph, and it was, I think, 30 pieces to cut Samson's hair. I mean, think about it. It was 30 pieces to cut Samson's hair, and then 30 pieces for Joseph. I mean, it's like a running theme. but uh, but most people say, nah, the Bible's not like that. Okay, well, let me get back to the story. Meanwhile, Jesus was planning for his last meal with his disciples. To Peter and John he said, "Go prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat it." So they had people, they hired people to, have the Passover. Or they hire themselves out to cater the Passover. Okay, let's get back. They were to find a room big enough for 13 people, and they asked Jesus whether he had a special place in mind. He said he had, and he told them how to find it. "When you have entered the city," he said, "a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house which he enters, and tell the householder, 'The teacher says to you, where is the guest room where I am to eat the Passover with my disciples?' And he will show you a large upper room furnished there, made ready." It was already made for. Okay, they went to Jerusalem and everything turned out just as Jesus said. They met the man carrying the jar of water and followed him to the house. Then they asked the householder whether he had a room where Jesus and his disciples could eat Passover. "Yes," he said, he had. It was upstairs, and they were welcome to use it for the evening. Peter and John went up and saw the room and found it to be just what they wanted. So they laid the table and put the couches in place for Jesus and the 12 to recline on, which it was a custom for those in those days. Next, they brought the basins and towels so all could be washed before the meal. Then they went to the store and bought unleavened bread and unfermented wine, as the Passover rules require. In other words, it's just basically grape juice. Unleavened bread and grape juice. Because unfermented is just freshly squeezed grape juice. Okay. Next, they had to buy a paschal lamb. A paschal lamb. Had it inspected by the proper officials in the temple and kill it there, and then they cooked it. It is quite possible that Judas, being the treasurer of the group, actually paid for this lamb that was to be was the symbol of Christ, the Lamb of God, and and that either Peter or John took its life. In other words, they didn't know who killed prepared the lamb. Okay? At the time agreed on, all the disciples arrived at the upper room. Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, I flipped them. James, the son of Alphaeus, 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 A L P H A E, Alphaeus. So two James, Big James, Little James, as the TV show has. Okay, and Thaddeus, Simeon, and Judas Iscariot. Judas, remembering what he had told the priest, must have felt very uncomfortable, not knowing whether the others suspected his treason. Yet he made a show of loyalty by taking the couch next to Jesus. John took the couch on the other side of the master, so it would appear that his head was lying on Jesus' breast. his chest. Okay? As they all took their places, Jesus seemed more solemn than usual. In other words, he seemed more melancholy. That's what most people will call it, melancholy. But let me get back. As if something had been troubling him. It was hard to believe that, but in a little while before, he had been the center of the great scene in the temple, healing the sick, turning, and then it's got, okay, and it stops right there for a second. And then at, it's a Remy, or Rudin. It's got a big R on the bottom. And it looks like it's a lot more darks too. And they're finding, that's the guy with the water jar, yeah. And there's the two disciples that follow the guy. That's the illustration that's in here. And the big R is right here. Okay. Healing the sick, overturning the tables of the money changers, and hearing the children call him the Son of David. Something was troubling him, and it was not that he knew only a few hours remained before he would be arrested and crucified. He was worried about these friends of his and how little they seemed to understand of all he had tried to teach them. They were still expecting him to set up an earthly kingdom and still scheming who should be the greatest in it. Each one wanted to be prime minister or treasurer, and it wasn't going to be like that. Going to be like that at all. To Jesus, it seemed very, very sad that they should be thinking thoughts like these, when their little world was about to fall apart. What else could he do then? He had already done. He had already done to make them see that they must be humble and unselfish, or they would never see his kingdom at all. Excuse me for a second again. Okay, I was reading the name on it. Okay. There was no more There was one more thing he had to do, and he decided to try it. Raising from his couch, he took a towel, poured water in a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet, probably beginning with Judas, who sat next to him. One of the group should have attended to this before the meal began, but no one was willing to do it. There were too much pride in their hearts. Now, amazed, they saw their master, their Lord, their King, doing the humblest of duties. And then it's a Paul Remy. It's got the big R on it. And it's got one guy going, oh, great. Oh, like this. And everybody, sorry, my nose is running. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12. Got all 13 of them on here. And it's a Paul Remy. And it's a double page on the bottom. And it's the printing, not my camera. The books are 70 years old, and you gotta think, This is the clearest they got. Because most of these books were produced, so they would have a lot of errors. Okay, doing the humblest of duties. Okay. Peter couldn't stand it. When Jesus came to him, he cried, "You should never wash my. You shall never wash my feet." "If I do not wash you," said Jesus, "you have no part with me." At this, Peter answered, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." This is not This was not necessary, Jesus said, though I feel sure he loved Peter for saying it. Then he continued his work until he had washed the feet of all. After he had returned to his couch, he spake very plainly. "Do you know what I have done to you?" he asked. "You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. Then, okay, if I then, your teacher, your Lord and teacher, had washed your have washed your feet, you should ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do as I have done to you." Sorry, it's hard sometimes to read. And then, of course, I got the robot voice. Okay. Then, looking earnestly from one to another, he said very solemnly, "Truly, truly, I say unto you, a servant is no greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them." That was the hardest lesson Jesus ever taught. The hardest to remember, the hardest to follow. Maybe you and I need to learn it today. Are you willing to wash anybody's feet, even the feet of Judas in your, even the feet of the Judas in your life? And then, of course, uh, it's Remy, and it's actually uh, Peter, because Peter's normally the one bald that they always have as bald. And this is the illustration down at the bottom. And Peter's saying, "No, no, no, don't." And then then feet, hands, head. See why he kind of wanted his head clean. Okay, that was part 2, story 1. So it's time for the break. So I'm going to break, and then we'll be back in just a bit.